This program is vital because it not only creates workforce housing, but it keeps overall housing production moving at a time when the pipeline is the lowest it's been in years.
This proposal is a bad deal for MFTE renters, and it provides too little public benefit to be worth the $20 million price tag.
Well, those are some of the differing opinions on the Multifamily Tax Exemption Program, MFTE, which the Seattle City Council is looking at this week, a tax break given to developers to create more affordable housing. Is that tax break the right size to encourage development? And are the rents landlords would be able to charge with this new proposal going to present some bigger challenges for lower income renters? And also, what's going on with the budget proceedings this week, as we're now less than a week out from a major announcement about the city's economic outlook? Plus, what's going on with the high-level race for King County Executive with just a few weeks to go until Election Day? Well, all this and more this week on Seattle News, Views, and Brews, your coffee break political podcast. I'm Brian Callanan. I'm a host and producer on the Seattle channel. The views expressed here are mine, and I'm with my friend and co-host, David Croman, City Hall reporter for the Seattle Times. David, we are recording this with the Mariners up 2-0 in the American League Championship Series. Why am I still feeling slightly panicked? I don't know what it is.
Because you're a Mariners fan. That's I would question if you weren't feeling panicked. Yeah, I was thinking about it today, and it was, when they won the division series, I felt pretty relaxed because I was like, you know what, anything from here on out is gravy.
Yeah.
Even if they get swept championship series, I'll still see the season a success.
Yeah.
But now that they're up 2-0, now I'm like, oh boy, if they blow it, then I'm going to feel really bad again. So it's funny, their success has brought me more anxiety.
Always seems that way. Well, thank you, David, for sharing the sentiment that I feel as well. And thanks also to our background noise sponsor, City Grind Espresso on the first floor of City Hall. Thanks also to the patrons of the show. Really appreciate you. Support levels start out at just $5 a month. Patrons get immediate access to Patrons First podcast. You even get your own Seattle News, Views, and Brews decal and so much more. Find us on Patreon, Seattle News, Views, and Brews. Also, thanks for watching this podcast on Converge Media. The video version is on Converge Wednesday nights at 7. All right, let's go. Time for Right Here, Right Now. All right, a little background on this multifamily tax exemption. We touched on it a few weeks ago, but now the council's all set to approve it this week, this change, at its full council meeting. More details coming into focus here. So, MFTE, created by the state in 1995, it allows cities to give 12 years of property tax relief on new apartments with an exchange for rent limits in at least 20% of the units built. They're trying to encourage more affordable housing here. Cities get to set those limits, though, and what the council is considering now, this is coming from Mayor Harrell, would allow what landlords can charge for a one-bedroom apartment to go up to $2,600, down from about $2,200. The rent hikes could even jump higher after that in years ahead with inflation going on, and that could be a challenge for voters. But on the other side of the coin, developers just aren't building in this economy. Your colleague Greg Kim, David, wrote it in the Times. Nearly as many new housing units were permitted in 2021 as in all of 2020, 23, 24, and the first half of 2025 combined. So I'm just trying to take this big picture look at this again. Will this plan to potentially raise rents here work as a way to entice developers to build more? What do you think is going to come of this?
Yeah, I'm a little skeptical it will entice, a wave of developers to, in the same vein that I'm skeptical, say the comprehensive plan changes will unleash a wave of development. In part because they're just the forces working against it are I think if you talk to developers, certainly they have some complaints with Seattle's process, but I just think, interest rates and cost of construction materials and labor are kind of really the thing pushing development off the cliff. At the same time, some of these policies, if and when things pick up a little bit more, if you're in the developer world, would certainly be welcomed and make it more likely that you want to actually sign into the MFT program. I think the general consensus is the program isn't working great even as it is, and talk to pretty much anyone in the affordable housing world. There's a consensus that there's kind of a glut of affordable studios, things being built for single adults, which has actually led to vacancies in those buildings. But then when you look at affordable multifamily housing, there's really not very much of that. And that's kind of where the demand is. So then it becomes this thing of how do you how do you produce more? And the tack that they're taking right now is incentivize them.
Yeah.
Of course, if the goal is to make them significantly cheaper than market rate, then when the numbers you're talking about, the delta there between these multifamily tax
Yeah.
exemption studios and or apartments and the market rate isn't all that big.
Right.
But again, you think about sort of how this might play out over time. Eventually they might stay a little cheaper than what the market is doing. But it is a complicated calculation that everybody's making here.
Yeah, for sure. Greg brought this up. About 13% of this program's rent cap units were actually vacant last year. So there is this whole situation where if you raise the rents too much, maybe the people who could qualify for this program income-wise wouldn't be able to be a part of it because it would just cost too much for them. But I do feel like another big issue with this, David, is almost the council feels like to me is trying to reset the understanding of what MFTE is for, which is for workforce housing. I've heard that a few times in these council meetings, not really those in the lower income space, maybe 30% of area median income. So those folks get helped out by the housing levy, a lot of council members would say, for example, and the MFTE is helping out renters who are earning a little up the ladder, like in between 60 and 90% of AMI, so maybe like $70,000 to $107,000 per year. So then I see another balance there too. You got developers saying, hey, we're going to open up the door for more renters. These mid-range people, they need help too. But then some advocates say this is almost a giveaway for developers, helping out a group of people financially that don't need as much assistance. How do you look at that balance there too? Because I really feel like there's sort of a change in the narrative about MFTE going on.
Yeah, and it doesn't sound all too dissimilar to me as kind of the goals of the social housing developer, which is, um, there, and I do think this is kind of the hardest section of housing for Seattle, which is Seattle builds quite a bit of super low income housing because
Right.
Seattle voters pay a lot in taxes to do that, and because
Yep.
it's a priority of theirs. And then there of course for years, not so much now, but for years there was a lot of development of high-end housing and luxury apartments, and you can kind of get into the economic forces of how that leads to affordability. But
Sure.
it does, you look at that and it does kind of leave this section in between where it's not getting deep subsidies, but if you're a developer trying to maximize your profit, you're probably not trying to build the kind of workforce housing piece. And so it's funny because I do think that is kind of the goal of the social housing developer and
Yeah.
and also the multi tax exemption program, but the way in which they're funded or brought about are just much, much different. Because social
Yeah.
housing is taxing rich people, or high-paying corporations, and
Yeah.
uh, this is sort of trying to find a way to get those developers who might otherwise build kind of more expensive housing and push them into this slightly more affordable bracket.
Yeah.
I think some people would argue, there's a lot of arguments on both sides of this. One argument is, developers are doing great. They should be contributing more and they should be creating more affordable housing. The other piece
Sure.
is if we made it so that all of these developers, if it was super easy for all of them to build a bunch of housing, all of that high-end housing would become more affordable.
Yeah.
So it does kind of get at the crux of how different, political factions. I don't, that
Yeah.
sounds
Yeah.
more
Yeah. Yeah.
dramatic than it needs to be, but
Yeah.
how different groups of people kind of view the path toward development and affordability
Yeah.
in fairly different ways here.
Yeah, the key a lot of people would say is build more housing, and that will
Yeah.
help out a lot of different levels here. But I hear what you're saying. Yeah, that's a good distinction and comparison too with social housing as well. I should point out the council this week is also approving that 0.1% sales tax for public safety needs. This could add about $39-40 million to their budget. And speaking of budget, we are getting close to some big deadlines here. October 20th, that's when this new economic forecast report comes out. How accurate will it be in the midst of a federal shutdown? That's kind of a continuing topic of debate. Then October 21st at noon, that's when budget proposals, any potential changes to the document that they're working with right now, that's due in from council members. That requires two co-sponsors for submittal, so it gets a little more serious at this point. And David, we've talked about these new dollars the council has been banking on to come in. Sales tax for public safety. They're assuming yes votes on the education levy and the Seattle Shield business and occupation tax plan. But I'm really struck by the fact that even with all that new money, the city is still in this structural budget gap situation. The council's own briefings are saying it this week. The mayor's budget is expanding general fund spending, expanding the city workforce in 2026, and there's this $140 million deficit predicted for 2027. I guess this just wasn't an issue Bruce Harrell was interested in dealing with directly during an election year. What do you make of this work that's going on with the budget and the pointing, just I see it continually, of this deficit that's going to be happening in a couple years, despite all the efforts they're going into making this budget happen this year?
Yeah, exactly. That's the question I've been asking them, which is, the structural problem versus the annual problem in
Yeah.
some way.
Hmm.
Which is the annual problem is something that they have so far basically dealt with. You might disagree with how they've dealt with it, but they have, which is they've used the payroll tax to fill the gaps, or in this case, they're passing this B&O tax or they're using the sales tax and they're kind of finding ways to bridge the deficit. And they've done so in a way where they haven't really cut city services in any significant way. They haven't laid a lot of people off. So by that measure, if you are somebody who wants to avoid a quote austerity budget, however you want to define that, then
Yeah.
that has been what's happened. The
They've
problem
taken
is
away some dollars from what was originally meant for, at least with that payroll expense tax. But yeah, keep going.
right, yeah, some things that were going to happen will not happen, but things that are currently happening are
Yep.
not being cut,
Yep.
pretty
Yep.
much.
Yep.
And so, on the one hand, Harold can point to that as perhaps a success. I've managed this problem, but on the other hand, it is built a little bit on a house of cards, which is it has not fixed the problem for next year, and it has not fixed the problem for the year after that.
That overall deficit.
If
Yeah.
that payroll tax goes south, and who knows, it hasn't done as well as they forecasted, but also hasn't done badly by any stretch of the imagination. Um, this is an unpredictable tax, and the forecasters will say that they don't have a lot of data on how this is going to go long term. So something goes there, say Amazon goes out of business or something,
Sure.
whatever
Right.
that may,
Right.
we have a lot more problems, but
Yeah.
um, then that payroll tax isn't there to fill that gap. Say Seattle voters change their minds and say, what, we don't actually like this B&O tax. There's a lot of assumptions in this budget, and they're good ones
Hmm.
for the most part, but it is still a budget resting on assumptions. And
Yeah.
you know, if the city doesn't want this to be a problem year over year, it has to either decide that there are programs that no one longer wants to fund, or just go all in on some kind of new tax source. And I think if Katie Wilson wins, uh, and honestly, probably if Bruce Harrell wins too,
Yeah.
but certainly if Katie Wilson wins, I think the chances of the latter go up, which
Yeah.
is maybe they pass some kind of capital gains tax
Hmm.
so that they kind of just make this problem go away with new revenue.
Yeah.
Certainly, if you're in the Chamber of Commerce or Downtown Seattle Association, you would like to see them make some cuts, because there was a
Yep.
lot of programs that were built on one-time funding that
Yeah.
still exist, and no one is really that willing to hold their nose and cut them, which may
Yeah.
be for good reason.
Yeah, yeah, fair. I do want to point out too, the council's also hearing two briefings this week on the budgets of two of its biggest departments, Seattle Public Utilities, Seattle Department of Transportation, SDOT. There was one part that stuck out to me like a sore thumb, David. Money for the long embattled Seattle streetcar, $13.6 million to support streetcar operations in 2026. It looks like the ridership on the First Hill line is approaching what it was in 2019 pre-pandemic. The the South Lake Union ridership low doesn't appear to be on the rebound at all. I just wanted to ask, David, is this the year we finally say the Seattle streetcar link up expansion, whatever you want to call it? Are we going to say it's dead? Because I just get the feeling that council members are going to come after that money somehow.
Yeah, you mean for the connection
Yeah,
between
yeah.
the two, there's no kind of limbo project like the Seattle streetcar.
Oh
Although
yeah.
Seattle's a nice list of limbo projects. You could probably put the missing link in there and that big development hole across the street from City Hall, but
Magnolia
certainly
Bridge. Yeah, there's a few.
Magnolia
You bet.
Bridge, yeah.
Mhm.
Projects that are neither dead nor alive, just kind of living in purgatory. And
Yes.
the down First Avenue streetcar is one of those things. And Bruce Harrell, I would say he's probably been about as honest about this issue as any, which is that he wants it. He legitimately wants to build that streetcar and has
Yeah.
been supportive of it for a long time. And you don't actually hear this from Seattle politicians that often, which is, this is the thing I want that we can't afford. And
Ah, Yeah.
He has said that in fairly clear terms. But I also think that leads to the scenario where it's going to keep coming up. He's never going to want to be the one to say, okay, this thing is dead. I'm going to leave it alive. But unless the economy does something miraculous,
Hmm.
and the coffers start overflowing again, I just don't see any scenario in which any elected politician pulls the trigger to make that thing a reality. It's
Yeah.
also hard to imagine one in which they pull the trigger to finally kill it. So I just think it's going to live on in purgatory year after year.
Oh boy, it feels that way. We'll see what happens later on in this process here as we get some of these budget amendments coming in from the council members. All right, well, coming up, a new crisis care center set to open in Seattle with approval from the King County Council after many months of deliberation. Is this going to be in the right spot? How will it impact our health system? Some ideas next on Now Hear This. Well, in case you missed it last week, the King County Council voted to approve plans and funding for a new walk-in mental health crisis center at the former Polyclinic building on Capitol Hill. This is a center where anyone will be able to receive urgent mental health and substance use treatment regardless of insurance status or ability to pay. If you recall, this is part of a tax levy that voters approved 2 years ago, and 5 of these have been slated to go online. One's in Kirkland already. But finding the right location is always a challenge, as the county heard from public commenters last week.
To be investing in our own recovery and mental health facilities now more than ever. We need to put this in place as soon as possible.
What you will hear from many today is that we're not convinced the old Polyclinic facility is the right building for a crisis care center and a residential treatment facility for the next 50 years.
David, plenty of back and forth about the location of this spot. The council did approve it here. It's up there on Broadway and East Union, but they did have some questions about why it was this location in particular. The county's Department of Community and Human Services said basically it's near some of these other hospitals, has a lot of public transit access, and it's a big facility, 115,000 square feet, to potentially help a lot of people. I was just struck by this fact that citing one of these almost sounds like citing another hospital, really. It's a big challenge to try to find the right spot for something like this.
It really is. I mean, it's hard to find a spot to build new housing in Seattle, let alone
Yeah,
a crisis care center that
yeah,
will host some people with some fairly significant issues that they're dealing with.
right.
Um, and I would say, the pushback against some of this siting has been quite well organized. I'm getting messages from, hired consultants and people who I know do political work and things like
Yeah,
that. So
right.
the opposition here is quite intense and apparently well funded because of the kind of outreach I'm getting at. The thing that they're talking about a lot is, transparency.
Hmm.
How are these sites being found and
Vetted, yeah.
cited, and
Hmm.
records. They're collecting records showing, this building is needs new work or is in poor
Yeah.
condition. But
Hmm.
I think it kind of all goes back to a general concern about what it means to have a crisis care center in a
Yeah,
certain neighborhood. Um, and that's a tough thing and
yeah,
sort of gets at a lot of the challenges in Seattle, which is
yeah,
um, we want to help and address a lot of the fairly intense mental health and substance use crises that we see happening, particularly on Third Avenue.
hmm,
But how we cite that and where those people get help is no one's really all that eager to be the host of that at the same
yeah.
time, and it puts the city in this sort of catch-22, which is difficult to get out of.
Yeah, and this is the city and county trying to work together on this, and the hope is to have it up and running by 2027. Bruce Harrell, Seattle mayor, said a few months ago he supports the idea, but there are a few provisos here. The county and the operator of this facility, which is still to be named, they have to do a security assessment with the Seattle Police Department. They're going to do community outreach. They're going to try to create a good neighbor agreement for these surrounding businesses and homes. So that's really going to be a test there. I know the county already has a facility open in Kirkland. It's actually near where 90 and 405 come together. So it's a kind of an interesting neighborhood, definitely not as populated as what we're talking about here on Capitol Hill. That facility did face some pushback going in, seems to be working okay. I'm just trying to figure out that long-term piece here. What is it going to take for this Seattle location to get up and running and stay up and running? What do you think?
Yeah, I don't know that world well enough to say for sure, and who
Yeah.
wants to be the host of that, or who wants to run that polyclinic.
Yeah.
So, it's a little outside of my my expertise to know
Mhm.
exactly who's going to handle that, but certainly certainly a challenging a challenging task.
Yeah, yeah, it's just that outreach part, as you say. It looks
Yeah.
like there are some well-funded folks out there who might be pushing back on that. So, something to look at, something that we'll be taking a look at over the next couple of months here, I'm sure. And I did want to speak about King County a little bit further because we've got this King County executive race between current King County council members Claudia Balducci, Gurmai Zahalai, a big race. The first time we won't have someone named Dow Constantine in this role of executive for more than 16 years. But Balducci and Zahalai can be so similar in their approach. David, any thoughts about this race? We haven't heard a ton from the two candidates. They're starting to do some public forums, etc., but there hasn't been a lot of publicity about it so far.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know, it is tempting often in Seattle and King County races to sort candidates into these buckets, um, however you want to define them. I would say probably the most potent tends to be, stranger endorsed versus Seattle
Yeah,
Times
yep,
endorsed.
totally.
But there's a lot of other things you could throw into that. Business, labor. It's hard to do that with Zahalai and Balducci. Their priorities are so similar. So you kind of have to look at their experience or how they deliver their message, whatever it might be. I would say Balducci is a bit more the candidate of, I guess you could say, slightly more moderate
Hmm.
um, folks. Perhaps she benefits a little bit more from the people who voted more Republican in the primary.
Yep.
But again, you're really splitting hairs here between the two of them. I guess Balducci might be a little bit more like uh, straightforward as far as maybe a little more oriented.
Mm.
She's been in government for so long, much
Yeah.
longer than
Yep.
Gurmai Zahalai has been.
Hmm.
He comes from a background of private. I think he worked for Perkins Coie
Yeah.
actually,
Yeah. Yeah. Hmm.
and has been on the council for what is it, 4 years at this point.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so she has a little, and she was been on the Sound Transit Board forever, and
Yep.
so has a little bit more kind of detail, is a little more detail oriented. He perhaps maybe comes off a little more loftier, a little more idealistic than
Mm.
Balducci does.
Yeah.
So you see him kind of lumped more into the Katie Wilson
Yeah.
bucket
Camp.
of things.
Hmm.
But again, it's not like these are two drastically different policy perspectives that we're getting from the two of them.
Yeah, and just looking at the numbers in the primary, Zahalai finished with 44% of the vote. Balducci got just under 30%. So yeah, maybe some of those more centrist to right-leaning candidates who ran in the primary, she could pick up some of those votes. But again, I think we're looking almost at King County as a microcosm of the state. Even if she does pick up those suburban votes, that's great. She still has to do something in Seattle to make up that 14-point gap there. And I just keep on trying to come back to, is there an actual policy issue that's going to propel them to a win here? I'm trying to figure out where they should even be putting down their political capital. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it comes down to taxation generally,
Yeah,
or policing, style of policing,
yeah, yeah,
to an extent because of what this job is. Sound Transit, I think, probably plays a bigger role in that race than even the Seattle mayor's race, even
yeah,
though we both each have one seat. But
yeah,
just feels like King County has, because Sound Transit's spanning the county a little more.
yeah,
But I don't know. I don't know that this race will necessarily turn on one specific
yeah.
policy proposal or difference that they have between the two of them. I think, again, I think it'll be kind of more about what you want in
Hmm.
an executive than one specific policy that one of them holds very strongly that the other one does not.
Yeah, I hear you. I was hoping you'd have some really great and cogent answers
I
there because I
I
have to
don't.
host. No, I have
As
to
you can
host.
tell, I don't have a great take on this race, and I don't know that I'm not convinced anybody does
I
because
don't. Well, I have to host a debate with him in a few days on Seattle Channel. So, hoping to get some Cliff's notes from David. Not on this one, definitely.
no, sorry.
Yeah, no, it's all right, man. Still working on it. Still working on it. Well, coming up, a return to work for city workers. That's not exactly what it appears to be. We're talking about a return to work mandate and how that has turned into a 2-day requirement, not a 3-day requirement. We're going to talk a little bit of what's going on here. The story's right around the corner, coming up on What's Next. David, you wrote recently in the Seattle Times that the city and its largest union of city workers, they've reached a new settlement agreement that ends up allowing some city employees to work from the office 2 days a week. So the city policy says, workers have to complete 3 days of at least 4 hours in the office. But with this new settlement, and this came after an official grievance from Protect 17, which is the city's largest union, if a worker's manager gives approval, employees can essentially stack 2 4-hour work blocks in a row and then turn 8 hours in the office into magically 2 days. What does this mean? Because this really does sound like 2 days and not exactly three.
Yeah, I mean it's very it just feels very like uh the product of a negotiation between a government and a
Okay.
union.
Okay. Yep.
Uh so this grievance, going back in time, the Protect 17 has always kind of chafed at the edicts around coming back into office. They want more flexibility around this than management at the city of Seattle has been willing to give them. So, it's in 22, Harrell had a 2-day a week mandate and then bumped that up to 3 days, and that became a bit of a fight between the administration and the union. And
Yeah.
so this grievance came because the language said 4-hour days.
Yeah.
And apparently the management was trying to get them to be in the office for 8 hours. So this became a grievance. They were fighting over it. And the compromise that they come up with is that, okay, we agree that 4 hours is a day,
Yeah.
but you can also put together 2 4-hour chunks and create 2 days out of one. Um, it's hard to know how often this is going to be used. The mayor's office they pushed back on this story a bit, actually. They didn't really want me to do it because they didn't think it was newsworthy enough,
Mm.
because they say that, this requires a, quote, alternative work arrangement that requires some process. It's not like anyone
Sure.
can just choose to do this. At the same time, though, that policy of stacking 2 4-hour chunks together to create one day, or 2 days out of one, that had never been put down on paper before. That's new. And so for that to me was why it was noteworthy.
Yeah.
And because, so much hand-wringing has been done in downtown Seattle around how do we get people back into the office?
Yeah.
The vacancy rates are bad. There's
Yeah.
37% or something like
Right.
that.
Still lingering there, not
That
getting
might
better.
even be better than it appears because of leases that just are still extending from pre-pandemic. And, it's
Yeah.
possible this thing could get even worse.
Yeah.
And so it was a really big deal when Harrell and King County and Sound Transit said, hey, we're going to require everyone to be here 3 days a week, because
Yeah.
the Chamber celebrated it, the Downtown Seattle Association celebrated it, both because they saw it as setting a precedent for other employers.
Yeah.
And also because, if you're a lunch counter and you're selling lunch, it's better to have people buying lunch 3 days a week than two.
Yep.
I don't think this necessarily upends that, but it does, again, codify a possible loophole in which 3 days turns into 2 days, and at a time when the city is sort of trying to bump up office, fill up its offices. I think I'm not here to like say the sky is falling, but I think it's a policy change that was worth putting on the record and
Yeah.
monitoring how it plays out going forward.
Is it a political football at all in the mayor's race? Because Protect 17, as you reported, ended up supporting Katie Wilson, not Bruce Harrell. Any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I thought about that. I don't actually. I think everything's political these days. So
Good point.
But
Yeah.
in this case, I don't actually think it really is. I think this grievance has been open for a long time. Protect has
Okay.
already endorsed Katie Wilson. They just dumped $75,000 into a PAC on her behalf. I think
big,
that
yeah.
ship has sailed.
Yeah.
I don't think settling this grievance does anything.
Okay.
I think more it's it's a busy time. It was a way to get this off their plate.
Mhm.
If grievances go on too long, you kind of start escalating it to bringing in more third parties, and nobody really loves that.
Yeah.
And again, the mayor's office doesn't think it's going to end up being that significant, and they might be right.
Mhm.
But I'll, just reiterate what I told the mayor's office, and I'm saying here. I just think putting this on the record that this is a possibility, this is a thing you can do,
Yep.
does strike me as a change in policy.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not a significant one, but at a time when we're talking so much about office vacancies, I thought it was
Yeah.
notable.
Yeah. Gotcha. Thank you for reporting on that. I do need to wrap up with you, and another budget question, I guess, here for you, David. thinking about tickets, purchasing them for the American League World Series. I've poked around a little bit. I'm seeing like $350 a piece, maybe. And then looking towards World Series, I don't want to look that far, but I'm still kind of looking on StubHub and stuff. $1,900 and up for some of these tickets. I know my eyebrows have been raising significantly myself. Is there a level of madness that you accept on that, or what? I don't even know where to start. It just seems so nuts. I thought the tickets were kind of expensive in the regular season, and we're going with this now.
I know, yeah. I dropped over 200 for
Yeah.
game 2 of the division series, and it was worth it. It was great. I have zero regrets.
Hmm.
I don't think I can do that multiple times,
Yeah.
particularly when we're getting into the World Series.
Yeah.
As much as I would love to be there, I just like literally can't afford. I have to like sell my car or
Yeah.
something
Right. Right.
to be
That's
able to
kind
go, and so probably will enjoy it from the comfort of my, well, if
we'll
you know,
see. We'll
would
see.
enjoy it from the comfort of my couch or a bar.
Yeah, yeah, there's that. Well, if it goes to game 7 and it's somehow mysteriously back in Seattle, I got to think that there might be a for sale sign on David's car out in front of his place.
You
I'm just
know,
throwing that out
yeah.
there. We'll see.
There has been a trend of if you wait until really the last few hours, the ticket prices have been dropping
Yep.
on the third party sale. So I will be monitoring that both for the World Series, both for the championship series and if they get to the World Series. But again, I can't be dropping $1,000 on baseball tickets.
It's a little insane for sure, but hey, it's
Yeah.
insane they've made it this far. David, thank you
Thank
as
you.
always for joining me. Thanks to everybody listening to Seattle News, Views, and Brews, where you can always find out what's brewing in local politics. If you want to be a patron, support the show, please do it. Pledge $5 a month or more on Patreon to Seattle News, Views, and Brews. Hear this podcast on Apple, Spotify, wherever you're listening. We're there. Thanks for watching on Converge Media too. See you next time. Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright